Psychology stands at a curious crossroads between philosophy and natural science. It is a natural science because it seeks to investigate the facts and laws of mental life. Yet it is philosophy because the very object of its study is consciousness itself, the inner field of experience which no other science touches. The subject matter is at once intimate and elusive. Everyone knows what consciousness is, and yet no one can tell precisely what it is like in itself. We can only study its appearances, its relations, and its effects. Psychology then becomes the science of mental life, both of its phenomena and of their conditions. By phenomena we mean the immediate data of experienced thoughts, feelings, desires, volitions, sensations. By conditions we mean the physical processes, the brain and nervous system, which accompany and support these mental states. The methods of psychology must reflect this dual character. On one hand, there is introspection, by which we attend to our own inner states and report their nature. On the other hand, there is experimentation, in which we bring mental processes under special conditions and observe their course. There is also the comparative method, which considers the mental life of animals, of infants, of abnormal and pathological cases. All these methods together furnish the material of psychology. Yet psychology is not physics, nor is it biology. It is a study of the world from within, of the forms in which reality is given to a conscious subject. This peculiar standpoint must never be lost sight of, for if we reduce psychology entirely to physiology, we abandon its very essence. The relations of mind and brain are intimate, but they are not identical. Every thought we have corresponds with some cerebral process, and yet the thought is not that process. It is something other, a fact of consciousness. When we turn from method to substance, perhaps the most fundamental fact is that of habit. Habits are acquired pathways of discharge within the nervous system, grooves into which the currents of thought and action readily fall. The brain is plastic, and impressions leave their traces in its structure. Once a certain way of acting has been repeated, the tendency to act again in the same manner becomes strong. Habits, thus, are the conservative factors in our mental life. They simplify our movements, economize our attention, and stabilize our conduct. They form the groundwork upon which character and personality are built. Without habits, life would be chaotic, for each act would have to be newly learned and each decision freshly made. With habits, however, we move securely and easily through the world. The advantages of habit are many. They make our actions accurate, diminish fatigue, and free the mind for higher operations. Think of the child learning to write, painfully shaping each letter, compared with the adult who writes fluently without thought. The transition is the work of habit. Or consider the piano player, whose fingers run over the keys almost automatically, leaving the performer free to think of interpretation and expression. Habits carry us forward with little conscious effort so that we may direct our attention elsewhere. They are like the cogs of a wheel, once set in motion, turning of their own accord. Yet habits are double-edged. They may enslave as well as liberate. The drunkard, the gambler, the idler all testify to the tyranny of bad habits. For this reason, the moral significance of habit is immense. Our nervous system is a living register in which every act is inscribed, and nothing is more certain than that conduct repeated tends to perpetuate itself. Hence the necessity of vigilance in youth, of guarding against the first beginnings of evil custom. Sow an act and reap a habit, sow a habit and reap a character, sow a character and reap a destiny. It is the law of growth by which human life is shaped. The rule, then, is to seize the very earliest opportunity of beginning the good habits one wishes to possess, and to guard with jealous care against the intrusion of the bad. Habit, however, though fundamental, does not exhaust the life of consciousness. Consciousness itself, the very field of mental life, is a phenomenon of another order. If one tries to define consciousness, he finds it elusive. For the moment we attempt to observe it, it changes. Consciousness is not a thing, it is a function. It is a process, a stream, a ceaseless flux. The analogy of a river or a stream is more appropriate than that of a chain or a train of cars. Consciousness does not consist of a series of detached ideas or images, as the older psychology conceived. Rather, it flows continuously, with transitions and relations as important as the substantive parts. It is always changing, no state once gone returns again. It is personal, belonging to a particular self. It is selective, attending to some things and ignoring others. And it is purposeful, in that its flow tends toward adaptation and action. Let us consider the so-called stream of thought more closely. If one sits quietly and allows the mind to wander, one notices a ceaseless succession of ideas, images, sensations, feelings. One thing leads to another by association. Yet there is never a break, never a real gap. The transitions may be faint, but they are there. The thought of a friend leads to a memory of a conversation, thence to an idea of a book, and so forth. Each idea melts into the next. The substantive parts of consciousness are the resting places, the images and ideas that stand out clearly. The transitive parts are the vague fringes, the feelings of relation and tendency which carry us onward. Both are essential. The substantive parts are like the words on a page, the transitive like the sense of continuity that unites them into a sentence. An error of the older associationist psychology was to treat the mind as if it were composed of separate ideas, strung together by mechanical laws. In truth, the unity of consciousness is deeper than that. The mind is an organic whole, in which each part is affected by the rest. We never experience an isolated idea. We always experience a field, with a center and a margin, with a foreground and a background. The transitions, the relations, the tendencies are as real as the images themselves. Consciousness, therefore, is not a mosaic but a flowing whole. This brings us to the problem of attention, which is the focalization of consciousness. Out of the vast field of possible sensations and ideas, attention selects some for emphasis and others for neglect. The stream of thought is like a spotlight playing over a darkened stage. Only those objects upon which the light falls are clearly perceived. Attention is, therefore, the essence of consciousness, for without it we should live in a confusion of simultaneous impressions. Attention gives form and stability to our experience. It is the means by which we seize and hold fast to one object among many, the condition of knowledge, of memory, of reasoning, of will. Attention may be passive, as when a sudden sound or bright light startles us, or active, as when we deliberately fix our mind upon a subject. In the one case it is involuntary, the reflex yielding to a stimulus; in the other it is voluntary, guided by an idea or a purpose. Yet the line between the two is not sharp, for voluntary attention itself is sustained by the interest and feeling which objects awaken. A student who forces himself to attend to a dull page may succeed only if he can find some point of connection with his own desires and aims. Thus, interest and attention are inseparable. We attend because we care, and we care because the object has meaning for us. The physiological basis of attention lies in the brain. Certain nervous currents are reinforced while others are inhibited. The circulation of blood, the distribution of energy, follow the direction of attention. The eye moves to fixate what the mind selects, the ear strains to catch the desired sound. The whole organism cooperates in this act of selection. Attention is not merely a mental effort, it is a bodily adjustment as well. The brain itself is an organ of selection, and attention is its mode of functioning. The power of attention varies greatly among individuals. Some possess a steady and concentrated attention, able to hold a subject firmly for long periods. Others are easily distracted, their minds wandering from one impression to another. Education is in large part the cultivation of voluntary attention. the ability to fix the mind upon remote and abstract objects for the sake of distant ends. Without attention, no memory, no reasoning, no moral effort is possible. Attention is the very root of judgment, character, and will. If now we gather together these threads, we see how the foundations of psychology rest upon the recognition of habit, consciousness, the stream of thought, and attention. Habit shows us the conservative side of our mental life, the way in which the plastic nervous system stores up experience and repeats it automatically. Consciousness shows us the active side, the ever-changing field of immediate experience. The stream of thought reveals the continuous and personal nature of this field, its flux and unity. Attention discloses the selective and purposeful character of consciousness, the way in which the mind seizes upon what is important and ignores the rest. Taken together, these facts outline the primary features of mental life. The brain is the organ of consciousness, and in its structure and functions we find the indispensable conditions of mental life. It is not that thought is identical with cerebral motion, but rather that without certain motions, no thought occurs. Every idea, every sensation, every emotion corresponds to some activity in the nervous substance. The proof is manifold. Injuries to the brain abolish particular faculties. Diseases that alter its tissue impair memory, feeling, or will. Stimulants quicken thought, narcotics dull it, lesions destroy it. In every case, the mental fact varies with the cerebral condition. Thus, while mind and brain are not the same, they are inseparable in their operation. The brain is composed of billions of nerve cells, each capable of excitation and discharge. These cells are connected by fibers, and the pathways of communication are innumerable. An impression entering by the sense organs is carried to the brain, there to be transformed, combined, and responded to. The spinal cord and lower centers provide reflex and automatic adjustments, but the higher coordination of ideas and purposes belongs to the cerebral hemispheres. Within them lies the seat of consciousness. If the hemispheres are removed, as experiments on animals have shown, the creature remains alive, able to perform reflex acts, to move, to swallow, to breathe, but it is bereft of intelligence and spontaneity. The difference between such a discerebrated creature and a normal one is the difference between mechanism and mind. Yet it would be an error to conceive of particular ideas as stored in definite cells like books in a library. Rather, the brain is a plastic organ in which innumerable currents may circulate, and in which particular sets of cells and fibers may form paths of least resistance. Memory, habit, association are but names for these pathways once established. Every impression modifies the brain, and the modifications are the conditions under which consciousness arises. It is as if the mind were the glow of a lamp and the brain the burner. Vary the mechanism and the flame changes, but the flame is not the mechanism itself. Still, without the burner, there is no flame. From the general functions of the brain, we pass to the special organs of sense, through which the outer world affects us. For sensation is the basis of all knowledge. Without sensations, there could be no perceptions, no memories, no thoughts. The mind would be a blank. Through the senses we come into commerce with reality. Let us consider them in turn. Vision is the most perfect of the senses. The eye, with its retina, its rods and cones, its optical apparatus, is a marvel of delicacy. Light waves falling upon it excite the nerve endings, and these excitations are carried by the optic nerve to the brain, where they are transformed into visual sensations. The range of vision is wide, including colors, forms, distances, motions. The retina receives a picture of the external world, but it is not the picture itself that we perceive, it is the sensation that arises in consciousness. Moreover, the retinal image is inverted, and yet we see the world upright. Such facts show that perception is no mere copy of external reality, but a mental construction upon sensory data. Color sensations depend on the stimulation of different kinds of nerve endings in the retina. The eye has three fundamental modes of response corresponding to red, green, and violet. All other colors are mixtures. When light excites all three equally, we perceive white; when none, black. The phenomena of afterimages, of color blindness, of contrast and mixture confirm this theory. Vision is thus not merely a passive receiving, but an active process in which the brain interprets the excitations of the retina according to laws of its own. Hearing is the perception of sound waves through the ear. Vibrations in the air strike upon the tympanic membrane, are transmitted through the chain of bones to the inner ear, and there set in motion the delicate fibers of the cochlea. Each fiber responds to a particular frequency, so that the ear analyzes complex sounds into their components. The nervous impulses travel to the brain, and we hear tones, pitches, timbres. Musical perception, speech, noise, all depend on this marvelous organ. Yet hearing, like vision, is not a mere record of vibrations, it is the mind's interpretation. We locate sounds in space, we group them into melodies, we understand them as signs of events. The bare excitation is clothed with meaning by the activity of consciousness. Touch, taste, and smell, though less developed, are not less essential. The skin is covered with sensory nerves responsive to pressure, warmth, cold, and pain. Through them we know the resistance and texture of objects. Taste is confined to the tongue and palate, and recognizes four elementary qualities: sweet, sour, bitter, and salty. Smell depends on the excitation of olfactory cells in the nasal cavity by volatile particles. These lower senses are more primitive, but they provide indispensable elements of experience. They are intimately connected with instinct, appetite, and aversion. A fragrance recalls a scene, a flavor awakens a memory, a touch excites desire or repulsion. They link consciousness with the vital functions of nutrition, safety, and reproduction. But sensations are never isolated. They combine into perceptions, and the mind organizes them into a world of objects extended in space and enduring in time. Space perception is one of the most remarkable achievements of the mind. The retinal image is two-dimensional, a mere patch of color. How then do we see depth, distance, solidity? The answer is that the mind interprets the signs furnished by the senses. The convergence of the eyes, the accommodation of the lenses, the shading of objects, the perspective of lines, the overlapping of forms, the motion of parallax. All these are cues from which the mind constructs spatial relations. From childhood we learn to interpret them, until we no longer notice the process. The world appears to us immediately as extended in three dimensions, but this immediacy is the result of unconscious inferences based on sensation. Experiments with the newly blind who regain sight illustrate this truth. At first they see only patches of color, without distance or form. They must learn to connect the visual signs with the tactual and motor experiences of space. Only then do they perceive the solid world. Space, therefore, is not given ready, made by sensation. It is built up by the activity of the mind interpreting sensation. The same holds for the perception of motion and of magnitude. The eye does not directly record them, it provides signs which the mind organizes. Time perception is equally remarkable. Sensations succeed one another, but how do we know succession? Consciousness has a span, a specious present, within which successive impressions are held together and compared. We hear a melody as one whole, though it consists of notes following each other. The present moment, then, is not a mathematical instant, but a duration, a small stretch of time filled with content. Within it we apprehend succession and relation. Beyond it, memory extends backward and expectation forward, so that consciousness embraces past and future as well as present. Without this, we could never recognize rhythm, order, or causation. The very notion of time, as continuous and flowing, is derived from the inner experience of consciousness itself. The perception of space and time are not the work of sensation alone, but of sensation interpreted by the mind. They show that consciousness is not passive, but active, organizing the data of the senses into a coherent order. Our world is not merely given, it is constructed. And yet it is constructed according to law, according to the regularities of experience and the needs of action. The structure of the brain and the processes of the senses supply the material, but the form is supplied by the activity of consciousness itself. Thus, the functions of the brain, the operations of the senses, and the organization of perception together lay the groundwork of our knowledge of the world. The brain furnishes the conditions, the senses provide the material, consciousness shapes the result. The world as we know it, extended in space, flowing in time, filled with colors, sounds, forms, odors, touches, is the joint product of physical processes and mental activity. To study psychology is to uncover the laws of this process, to see how the brain and the senses conspire with consciousness to build up reality. And this is no abstract speculation, it is the very fabric of our daily life. Every object we touch, every sound we hear, every color we see is an instance of it. To understand it is to understand ourselves, for our entire commerce with the world rests upon it. The self, which is the most intimate of all realities, is at once simple and complex. We are confronted with a curious duality, for when we speak of the self, we may mean either the I, the pure subject of experience, or the me, the objective person known and contemplated. The I is the thinker, the knower, the unchanging center of awareness. The me is the sum of all that the I can call its own, the body, the possessions, the social roles, the inner character. The distinction is necessary, for without it we confuse the shifting contents of consciousness with the fact of consciousness itself. The me may alter, grow, diminish. The I remains the same, the witness of all these changes. The empirical self, or the me, admits of subdivision. There is the material self, consisting of the body and its appurtenances, clothing, house, family, property. There is the social self, which is the recognition one receives from others, the reputation and esteem that reflect back into consciousness. There is also the spiritual self, which is the inner faculties, dispositions, moral tendencies, and aspirations. These various selves together make up the total me. The esteem we place upon them varies with character. Some find their whole being in property and possessions, others in social acknowledgement, others still in inner convictions and ideals. Our self-feeling rises and falls with the fortunes of these components, swelling with success, depressed by failure. But underlying all these empirical selves is the pure ego, the I, which is not an object but the very subject of experience. When I say I see, I feel, I think, the I denotes the presence of a knower behind the content. It is not itself a content. It cannot be defined, for definition would make it into a me. It is rather the bare fact that experience is given to someone, the thread upon which the beads of sensation and thought are strung. Philosophers have debated whether this I is a substantial soul, an enduring entity distinct from the body, or whether it is but a functional unity among the phenomena. Psychology, as a science, cannot decide this metaphysical question. It must be content to recognize the fact of the I, without pretending to say what it is in itself. From the notion of self we pass to the associations of ideas, the laws by which one thought leads to another. The stream of consciousness is not a haphazard flux. It has order and continuity. When one idea arises, others tend to follow according to certain principles. Similarity, contiguity, contrast, cause and effect all serve as bonds of association. If I think of a friend, I recall his face, his voice, his house. If I think of a melody, the next notes follow of themselves. The mind is like a theater in which images succeed one another, but the succession is not lawless. It is guided by relations which have been fixed in the past. Association is the mechanism of memory, Imagination, reasoning. It is the way in which experience is bound together into a unity. Without it, each impression would vanish as soon as it came, leaving no trace. With it, the past lingers in the present suggests the future, and the whole course of mental life acquires coherence. Yet association is not a mere mechanical sequence, like beads sliding on a string. The eye is there, selecting, emphasizing, attending. Out of the vast number of possible associations, some are chosen, others neglected. Thus, the laws of association are tempered by the activity of attention, and the flow of thought is at once automatic and voluntary. Memory is but the persistence of experience through these associations. To remember is to know that an idea now before the mind has been there before. The feeling of familiarity, of recurrence, is its essential mark. Memory has two great forms, recognition and recollection. Recognition is the mere sense that something has been experienced, as when we see a face and know it is familiar. Recollection is the active revival of a past situation, the calling up of details and circumstances. The one is passive, the other active. Both depend on traces left in the brain by previous excitement, traces which render revival more easy. The brain, by its plasticity, stores the records of past experience, and the mind, by association and attention, brings them forth. The conditions of memory are delicate. Freshness of impression, repetition, interest, emotional excitement all aid retention. A dull, indifferent experience is soon forgotten, a vivid, significant one lingers. Repetition strengthens the pathways in the brain, making recall more certain. Interest binds the new fact to the self, and the self furnishes the cues by which it is recovered. Hence, the art of memory is largely the art of attention and association. If we wish to remember, we must attend, and we must connect the new with the old. Thus, education is not a mere storing up of isolated facts, but a weaving of them into a web of meaning. Errors of memory abound. We often confound imagination with recollection, taking what is imagined for what has been. False memories, illusions of recognition, lapses and distortions all show the frailty of this faculty. Yet despite these imperfections, memory is the foundation of our mental life. Without it, personality would vanish. Each day would be a new beginning, with no past to guide the present. Memory gives continuity, identity, history. It is the guardian of the self. Imagination, closely allied to memory, is the power of representing absent objects, of combining images into new forms. Memory recalls what has been. Imagination creates what has not been. Yet the two are not wholly distinct. Both deal with images, both depend on association. The difference lies in the relation to reality. In memory, we feel the tie to actual experience. In imagination, we do not. The poet, the inventor, the scientist all employ imagination, combining old elements into novel constructions. The image of a winged horse is imagination. The recollection of a horse one has seen is memory. But in both, the stuff is drawn from experience. Conception goes beyond imagination, in that it grasps the general in the particular. By conception we recognize classes, kinds, abstract relations. The child sees a dog, and later another dog. By conception he apprehends both as belonging to the same class. The mind forms a concept of dog in general. This power of abstraction and generalization is the foundation of language, science, philosophy. Through it we rise from the flux of particulars to the realm of universals. It is not a faculty apart, but a function of attention and association, selecting common features and disregarding differences. In conception, the mind is creative, for it frames ideas that no single sensation gives. Imagination and conception alike show the constructive character of the mind. We do not merely receive impressions. We work them over, recombine them, generalize them. The mind is active, not passive. It builds a world out of the materials furnished by sense and memory. This constructive activity is most manifest in art, poetry, invention, but it pervades all life. Every plan for the future, every supposition, Every hypothesis is an act of imagination. Every judgment of likeness or kind is an act of conception. Without these, we should be prisoners of the moment, unable to anticipate or to think. The self, association, memory, imagination, conception. These together form the inner structure of mental life. The self furnishes the point of reference, the I who knows, and the me who is known. Association links ideas into a stream. Memory carries the past into the present. Imagination projects possibilities beyond the actual. Conception gathers particulars into universals. Thus the mind reveals itself as a living process, not a static thing. It is a movement, a growth, a construction, forever weaving the manifold of experience into the unity of consciousness. Thinking is the movement of consciousness toward conclusions. It is not a mere succession of ideas, for that succession may be haphazard, but a guided procession where each step follows with a sense of direction and purpose. To think is to seek, to compare, to combine, to pass from what is given to what is implied. The simplest form of thinking is the recognition of identity, when we feel that a present experience resembles a past one, and thus classify it under a concept. From this rudimentary act of abstraction, all higher reasoning develops. To abstract is to attend to one aspect of a thing and neglect the rest, to seize upon what is common and disregard the particular. The ability to abstract, therefore, is the key to rational life. It enables us to treat unlike things as alike, to gather many experiences into a single formula, to frame rules and laws. Reasoning is the process by which the mind passes from premises to conclusions. It is the conscious recognition of relations among ideas. We reason when we see that if one thing is true, another must be true. The syllogism is the classical type, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Yet reasoning does not always take this formal shape. It is often implicit, a rapid perception of consequence. The child who shrinks from the fire reasons that the flame which burned yesterday will burn again. The merchant who calculates his gain reasons that certain figures imply certain results. The scientist who frames a hypothesis reasons that if a law holds, certain facts must follow. In all these cases, the mind goes beyond what is immediately present, and the sense of logical necessity binds the steps. The function of reasoning is practical as well as theoretical. We do not reason for the sake of reasoning, we reason in order to act. Our conclusions guide our conduct, and the test of reasoning is its success in adaptation. Truth is that which proves itself in experience, which enables us to deal with reality. Theories are instruments, not ends in themselves. The worth of reasoning lies in its fruits, in the mastery of nature, the ordering of society, the guidance of life. Thus logic and utility are not opposed, they are two aspects of the same process. Belief is the other side of reasoning, for to reason without belief would be idle. Belief is the mental state in which an idea is held to be true. It is not merely the presence of the idea, but the sense of its reality. To believe that it will rain is to anticipate rain as a fact, to adjust oneself accordingly. Belief varies in degree, from a faint surmise to absolute conviction. Its essence is the readiness to act. We may doubt or disbelieve, but when belief is firm, the mind and body prepare for conduct as if the object were assured. Thus belief is not a cold intellectual assent. It is a vital attitude, the recognition of reality with practical consequences. The psychology of belief shows that it is not determined by logical evidence alone. Our passional nature, our desires, our habits, play a large part. We believe what fits our interests, what satisfies our hopes, what harmonizes with our tendencies. Often belief precedes evidence and guides the search for it. The scientist believes in the intelligibility of nature, and on that belief he builds his investigations. The reformer believes in justice, and on that belief he risks his life. Even in matters of perception, belief enters. We see what we expect to see, we interpret sensations according to our preconceptions. Belief thus pervades all consciousness, shaping it into order and coherence. The distinction between a dream and waking life lies in the stability of belief. The dream dissolves because belief fails. Waking persists because belief is continuous. Instinct forms another foundation of mental life. It is the inborn tendency to act in certain ways under certain stimuli, without prior training or experience. The chick pecks at food, the spider spins its web, the bird builds its nest, the infant sucks, cries, grasps. These acts are not learned, they are native. They are the inherited results of countless generations, fixed in the nervous system. Instincts are the capital with which nature endows us, the primitive equipment of behavior. They are numerous and varied, more numerous than we usually suppose. Fear, curiosity, play, rivalry, sympathy, anger, love, all have instinctive roots. They furnish the impulses out of which character and conduct grow. Yet instincts are not rigid, they are modifiable by experience. They may be inhibited, redirected, combined. The dog's instinct to bite may be turned into play, the child's curiosity into study, the fighting impulse into competition in games. Thus, education is largely the training of instincts, the formation of habits upon instinctive bases. If instincts were absent, life would be impossible, for reason alone could not guide us in the face of novel situations. If instincts were immutable, life would be mechanical, without progress. Their plasticity makes adaptation possible, their variety makes richness of life. Instinct and intelligence are not opposed, they are continuous. Intelligence grows by working upon instinct. Emotion is the inner side of instinct, the felt accompaniment of instinctive acts. When the impulse is aroused, we feel it as fear, anger, joy, grief, love, hope. Emotion is not something added to the act, but the consciousness of its bodily expression. The theory that bears my name holds that the bodily changes come first, and the emotion is their perception. We do not weep because we are sad because we weep. The trembling, the palpitating heart, the quickened breath, the flushed face, these are the elements of emotion as experienced. Take away the bodily symptoms, and the emotion vanishes. The difference between fear and anger is the difference of bodily attitude and sensation. Emotion, then, is a perception of changes within the organism, stirred by instinctive impulses. This view does not degrade emotion, but explains its urgency and reality. Because the body is involved, emotion grips us, compels us, resists mere reasoning. Belief itself is tinged with emotion, for to believe is to feel the object as real. Instinct and emotion furnish the driving forces of life, while reasoning and belief furnish the guidance. The intellect without impulse would be inert, the impulse without intellect blind. Together they form the harmony of human nature. Our noblest endeavors, our science, art, morality, religion, all spring from the union of reasoning with instinctive passion. The coldest logic would never stir the will without the warmth of feeling, and the wildest impulse would never sustain itself without some rational justification. If we survey the ground, we see how these elements cohere. Abstraction enables us to generalize, to see the one in the many. Reasoning leads us from fact to law, from premise to conclusion. Belief gives reality to the result, making it practical. Instinct supplies the native impulses that set the process in motion. Emotion colors it with urgency and significance. Human consciousness is not a mere procession of pale ideas, but a drama in which thought and passion, intellect and impulse are interwoven. The rational animal is not a contradiction but a synthesis. To understand him is to see that logic, belief, instinct, and emotion are not separate compartments, but phases of one living stream. Thus the psychology of thinking and reasoning, of belief, of instinct and emotion, reveals to us the dynamic nature of mind. It is not a static mirror of the world, but an active power, guided by purposes, animated by impulses, colored by feelings. Its aim is adaptation, its method is selection, its outcome is conduct. To study it is not merely to analyze thoughts, but to grasp the living unity of man as a creature who feels, believes, reasons, and acts. The laws of psychology are not abstractions remote from life, they are the very principles by which life is carried on, the forces that shape society, culture, and destiny. The phenomena of will occupy a central place in psychology, for they represent the point at which thought issues into action. The stream of consciousness, filled with sensations, ideas, emotions, would be incomplete if it ended in mere contemplation. It finds its culmination in conduct, in the overt deeds by which man adjusts himself to the world. Will is the name we give to that aspect of consciousness which controls and directs action according to ideas. To will is not simply to wish, but to decide and to act. A wish may linger as a dream, a hope, a reverie. A volition is the acceptance of one idea as the guide of behavior, with the exclusion of its rivals. The psychology of will thus concerns itself with the transition from thought to deed. The course of decision may be described as the struggle of ideas in consciousness. At any moment, many possibilities of action present themselves. Each is accompanied by images, emotions, tendencies. They press for realization, and the mind wavers between them. One idea stands forth, then another, as attention alternates. We deliberate, compare, anticipate consequences, feel attraction and repulsion. The conflict continues until at last one idea gains supremacy, seizes the focus of attention, inhibits its competitors, and discharges into action. This victorious idea is the decision, and its realization is the act of will. The peculiar feeling of effort arises when the decision is not easy, when opposing tendencies are nearly balanced, and the self must strain to hold to one against the solicitation of the others. Effort is thus the mark of will in its most characteristic form. Yet not all decisions require such struggle. Often the course is clear. The stronger impulse prevails without resistance, and the act follows of itself. These effortless volitions are the rule in ordinary life. Effort appears only in crisis, when duty contends with inclination, when the higher self asserts itself against the lower. In these moments the consciousness of will is vivid, and we feel most intensely that we are agents. But in truth, will pervades all action, even when unnoticed. Every voluntary act, however smooth, implies the dominance of an idea in consciousness, and that is the essence of volition. It is important to distinguish voluntary from automatic action. Automatic actions are those performed without conscious intention, by the mere discharge of nervous machinery. Walking, writing, playing the piano, when once learned, may become automatic. The idea does not guide each detail, the movements follow established pathways. Voluntary action, on the other hand, is initiated and directed by conscious ideas. In learning to walk or write, the child exerts attention, wills each step or stroke. With practice, the act sinks into the lower centers and becomes automatic. Thus, voluntary and automatic are not separate classes, but stages of one process. Every voluntary act tends, with repetition, to become automatic. Habit is the outcome of will. The higher centers are thus freed for new adjustments, while the lower centers carry on the routine. The psychology of will, therefore, cannot be separated from the psychology of habit. Will creates habits by voluntary effort, and habits relieve will by automatic performance. The art of life consists in forming useful habits so that the energies of will may be reserved for important crises. If we squander effort on trifles, none remains for great occasions. The wise man economizes his will, training himself to act rightly without effort in ordinary things, that he may be free to act greatly when need arises. Thus morality and efficiency depend upon the cooperation of will and habit. Decision-making illustrates further the nature of will. The mind is not a mere balance in which forces act mechanically. The self, by attending, by holding fast, by summoning motives, may tip the scales. There are cases where no logical superiority determines the issue, yet the act is decided by the fiat of the will. The individual says, "I will," and the choice is made. Such is the moral act par excellence. It is not determined by antecedent causes alone, but by the affirmation of the self. The consciousness of responsibility, of freedom, rests upon this power. Whether metaphysically free or not, psychologically the will appears as a creative force, introducing a new factor into the stream of events. Without it, man would be but an automaton, the sport of circumstances. With it, he is a person, an agent, a moral being. Voluntary action may be classified according to the presence or absence of deliberation. Impulsive action is immediate, without weighing consequences. It springs from sudden emotion, as when anger strikes or fear flees. Deliberate action involves reflection, comparison of ends, foresight of results. Between the two lie habitual actions, once deliberate but now automatic. Voluntary action also varies in its relation to effort. Some acts are performed with ease, others with painful struggle. The measure of character is shown in those moments when effort is sustained in the face of opposing desire. The capacity for effort is the deepest practical strength of man. The practical aspects of human conduct are inseparable from this psychology of will. For conduct is but the outward expression of inward volition. The ideals we set before us, the ends we choose, the habits we form, all depend on the exercise of will. Ethics is rooted in psychology. To say that a man ought to act thus, and so is to assume that he has the power of will to do so. The cultivation of will is, therefore, the highest task of education and of self-discipline. We must learn to attend, to resist temptation, to hold to distant ends against immediate allurements. The will must be trained as the body is trained, by exercise, by gradual increase of difficulty, by persistence in effort. Only thus does it acquire strength. Practical life is full of illustrations. The student who conquers his sloth to study, the soldier who holds his ground in danger, the philanthropist who devotes himself to a cause, all exemplify the power of will. In each case, an idea, a principle, a vision of good is made dominant in consciousness, and action is guided by it. Against fear, against desire, against weariness, the self affirms its choice. Here lies the dignity of human life. To act from will, in accordance with reason and ideal, is to be a man in the highest sense. Without will we drift, with will we steer. The relation of will to belief is intimate. We believe because we will to believe. We act on faith when evidence is incomplete. In many situations of life, evidence never reaches certainty, yet action cannot be postponed. We must decide, and the will to believe becomes the decisive factor. This is true in personal relations, in moral commitments, in religious faith. The leap of will bridges the gap of evidence, and the act creates its own justification. Thus will is not only the executor of belief, but often its creator. If we view human conduct broadly, we see that will is the organizing center. Instinct furnishes the impulses, emotion colors them, reason suggests means, but will chooses the ends and directs the whole. It is the sovereign function of mind, the source of responsibility, the ground of character. All civilization is the work of will, the accumulation of countless acts in which men have chosen order over chaos, duty over pleasure, law over caprice. The history of humanity is the history of will embodied in institutions, customs, arts, sciences, morals, and religions. The strength or weakness of nations, like that of individuals, depends on the vigor of their will. The psychology of will thus reveals the deepest practical truth, that man is not a passive creature of impressions, but an active power, capable of shaping his life. He is not merely what he has received from nature and society, but what he has willed to become. The stream of consciousness flows, but within it arises the act of will, the affirmation of the self, the choice of an ideal. That choice, once made, reverberates through habit, character, and destiny. In the end, the worth of life lies in the use we make of our will. in the acts we perform, in the conduct we maintain. For will is the very heart of personality, the flame of freedom within the mechanism of nature. The relation of psychology to philosophy is one that cannot be wholly severed, for psychology has sprung from philosophy and still leans upon it in manifold ways. Psychology, as a natural science, seeks to describe the facts of consciousness and their laws, as physiology describes the functions of the body. Yet in doing so it constantly touches upon questions of a more ultimate order. When we inquire into the nature of the self, the relation of thought to brain, the freedom of the will, we find ourselves on the borderland where psychology meets metaphysics. The psychologist, if he be strict, abstains from dogmatic assertion on these points, yet he cannot avoid acknowledging their presence. His task is to register phenomena, to analyze mental states, to trace sequences, but behind his data loom questions of being and value, which belong to philosophy proper. Still, psychology furnishes philosophy with its indispensable material. Any philosophy that neglects the actual facts of mind, that builds castles in the air without regard to experience, is vain. Psychology provides philosophy with its groundwork, while philosophy gives psychology its place in the whole of human knowledge. This relation is seen most clearly in the problem of consciousness itself. Psychology describes its stream, its continuity, its flights and perchings, its selective activity. But what consciousness is in itself, whence it arises, and how it can stand in relation to a material brain? These are metaphysical questions. Whether the self is a substance or only a series of states, whether mind is independent or a function of matter, whether the will is free or determined. Such inquiries pass beyond empirical psychology. Yet psychology prepares the way for them by clarifying the facts, by banishing confusion, by distinguishing what is given from what is inferred. Thus philosophy, instead of speculating in the void, finds in psychology a discipline and a guide. If we pass from philosophy to the field of education, we see psychology applied in its most practical form. For education is the art of training the mind, and psychology is the science of the mind's processes. To know how children learn, how habits are formed, how attention may be aroused, how memory is strengthened, how imagination works, these are problems in psychology before they are rules in pedagogy. The teacher who ignores psychology teaches at random, the teacher who knows it can adapt method to nature. For example, psychology shows that habit is the great conservator of education. To repeat an act until it becomes automatic, to associate ideas until they cling inseparably, to practice attention until it holds without effort. These are the secrets of training. The child who forms good habits early is equipped for life, for his will is spared the strain of continual struggle. Psychology also reveals the stages of growth, the gradual development of faculties, the difference between concrete and abstract thinking, the order in which subjects should be introduced. Education becomes scientific when it rests upon psychology, not upon tradition or accident. Nor does psychology merely aid in method, it ennobles the aim of education. For if man is not a vessel to be filled with facts, but a living consciousness to be awakened, then education is not the stuffing of memory, but the arousing of interest, the direction of attention, the stimulation of will. Psychology teaches that knowledge acquired without interest is barren, but knowledge won through active attention becomes part of the self. The teacher's task is to awaken the mind, to kindle curiosity, to make the pupil an agent, not a passive recipient. Here psychology passes into ethics, for the ultimate aim of education is to form character, to train the will, to prepare for conduct. Knowledge is means, conduct is end. The highest education is that which unites intellectual discipline with moral power. When we consider morality itself, psychology again offers illumination. Morality consists in action according to ideals, in the dominance of certain ideas in consciousness over rival impulses. The psychology of will of habit, of attention, explains the mechanism of virtue. To be moral is to have trained the mind so that good ideas prevail, bad ones are excluded, and the right act follows with ease. The struggle of temptation, the pangs of conscience, the sense of duty, are all facts of psychology. Conscience itself may be analyzed into self, feeling, sympathetic emotion, and the pressure of social expectations, all working in the stream of thought. Yet such analysis does not rob morality of its dignity, it clarifies its workings and shows how it may be cultivated. If conscience is but an aspect of mental life, it is nonetheless the voice of our better self, the form in which ideal ideas assert themselves against the solicitations of sense. Psychology shows that morality is not a miracle, but a possibility inherent in our nature, to be realized by discipline and will. The bearing of psychology upon religion is still more delicate. Religion, like morality, expresses itself in ideas, emotions, and acts of will. The consciousness of God, of communion, of dependence, is a psychological fact. Prayer, worship, conversion, ecstasy are experiences of consciousness, subject to description and analysis. Psychology does not decide upon their truth or falsity as metaphysical assertions, but it shows how they arise, how they affect life, how they are related to other states of mind. Religious experience is among the most intense and significant phenomena of consciousness. It cannot be ignored by psychology, though psychology must abstain from theological conclusions. The religious man finds in his consciousness an assurance, a peace, a strength, which psychology registers as fact, whatever its ultimate ground. In this way, psychology serves religion by bringing its experiences into the realm of knowledge, making them intelligible, guarding against illusion, and showing their connection with the totality of human life. Yet the relation is reciprocal. Religion, by directing attention to the higher, by fixing the mind upon ideals, by sustaining volition in the face of difficulty, powerfully influences the course of consciousness. The religious life, whatever its dogmas, is psychologically a life of concentrated will and purified emotion. It develops the deepest powers of the soul. Hence, the study of religion is not foreign to psychology, but central. No account of the mind is complete which omits the experiences of faith, worship, and devotion. They are as real as sensation and thought, and for many lives far more decisive. In bringing these reflections to a close, it is well to recall the standpoint with which we set out. Psychology is a science of phenomena describing the stream of consciousness and its relations to brain and conduct. It is not metaphysics, nor theology, nor ethics, though it touches them all. Its aim is to tell what is, not what ought to be, nor what ultimately is in the order of being. Yet by fulfilling this modest task, psychology renders priceless service. It clears the field of confusion. It disciplines thought. It gives solid ground for philosophy. It aids education. It enlightens morality. It interprets religion. It shows us man as a conscious being, with sensations, ideas, emotions, volitions, all flowing in one continuous stream, all rooted in a physical organism, all directed towards adaptation to the world. The great lesson of psychology is the unity and activity of this consciousness. It is not a heap of faculties, but a living whole, selective, purposive, teleological. The mind attends, chooses, remembers, imagines, reasons, wills. It is not a passive mirror, but a creative agent. In the light of psychology, man appears as a being who is at once natural and spiritual, bound by laws yet capable of freedom, conditioned by brain yet transcending it in ideal and will. The doctrine of the stream of consciousness, of habit, of will, of effort, all converge upon this conception of man as an active center of life, not a machine but a person. From this view flow the practical conclusions most needful for life. If consciousness is active, then it can be trained. If habit is plastic, then it can be shaped. If will is real, then it can be strengthened. Education, morality, religion are but the application of these truths. The individual who knows that his habits form his destiny will guard the beginnings, will act rightly today that tomorrow may be easy. He who knows that attention is the key to learning will discipline his mind to fix and hold. He who knows that effort is the secret of will shall not despair when struggle comes, but shall persevere. Psychology thus becomes a guide to conduct, a manual of life, not by prescribing rules, but by revealing laws. And finally, the spirit in which psychology should be cultivated is itself of moral import, for it demands patience, accuracy, impartiality, love of truth. It teaches us to look upon our own minds and the minds of others with reverence as the most wonderful facts of nature. It bids us acknowledge the mystery that ever surrounds consciousness, while rejoicing in the light that science can cast upon it. It warns us against arrogance, against materialistic dogmatism on the one hand, against mystical obscurantism on the other. It calls us to a sober, humble, earnest study of man, in whom nature and spirit are united. Thus the concluding insight is that psychology, rightly pursued, unites knowledge with life. It is not a barren science, but one full of human significance. It tells us what we are, and by telling, helps us to become what we may. It does not solve the ultimate riddles, but it brings us nearer to them by clearing away illusions and by training the mind to steadiness. It leaves us at last with a deeper sense of the wonder of consciousness, of the dignity of will, of the seriousness of conduct, of the grandeur of ideals. And in so doing it fulfills its true office, not merely to describe, but to awaken, not merely to analyze, but to inspire. For the final word of psychology, as of philosophy, is not explanation but vision, not knowledge alone but wisdom, not facts alone but the sense of life as a whole. And in that vision, which unites science with philosophy, education, morality, and religion, we find the consummation of our study and the justification of our toil.